Chapter 40. The Wedding. "We should burn him," Rowan said, as they all hovered over the body. "No," said Irina. "We need people to see him. Barovians have heard so many rumors and false hopes. Some already thought he was dead once. They won't believe us, not unless they can see with their own eyes." "Irina's right," Henry said. "I'd rather burn him too, but the people need to know. For now, we'll keep his body locked in here." Rowan turned away, and her heart pounded. She could not hold it in any longer. "We need to find Casimir," she said. They all searched the catacombs, walking by each crypt, reading the names, listening for any signs of life. Henry stopped at a crypt whose door was open. "This is the one I saw Victor go into," Henry said. The engraving on the door read, "King Katsky the Bright, ruler, inventor, and self-proclaimed time-traveler." Within the crypt, a skeleton covered in decaying rags lay atop a stone slab. The skeleton's empty hands rested on its ribs. They were fixed in a grasping position, as though they should have been holding something cylindrical, like a rod or staff. "Which Victor did you see?" Navara asked. "The young one," Henry said. But there was no Victor in the tomb. "He must have found the staff and gone back in time," Navara said. "Hold on. Victor did what?" Irina asked. Henry was about to comment when they heard Elvir shout, "I found it!" The were-raven was standing before another crypt. The name on the door read, "Baron Metis von Zarevich, brother, friend, traitor." Rowan and the others gathered outside the door and readied their weapons. Then Rowan gave Elvir a nod, and he opened the door. Stone grinded on stone. When the door was ajar, Rowan saw him. "Father," she said. "Rowan?" asked the man standing naked inside the crypt. His long white hair clung to his sunken cheeks, and his pale face was stained with blood. No, I cannot believe it," Metis said. His red eyes seemed to glow from within the dark tomb. "You cannot be here. You are an illusion, a trick, a phantom sent by Strahd to torment me." Though Rowan had always despised her father, those old feelings of hatred and fear were nowhere to be found. Perhaps the way she felt about him had been changed by her dreams. Or perhaps she was just too emotionally exhausted to feel anything at all. This was still the vampire who had held her prisoner for 14 years of her childhood. "Henry, bring Apollo closer," Rowan said. Henry lifted his sword, shining light into the small space. Metis hissed and withdrew to a corner. At the back of the crypt, standing upright, was an open coffin filled with protruding nails on the inside, and lying face down on the floor was a body. Rowan walked inside, ignoring her father. When she turned the body over, Casimir's vacant eyes stared back at her. His skin was drained of all color. Rowan knelt beside him. She did not cry or curse, but calmly closed his eyes and crossed his arms over his chest. Everything was numb. Nothing felt real. "Rowan," her father said, "it is you." The vampire lowered his hand that had been attempting to shield Apollo's light. "But how are you here? He's controlling you, isn't he, that bastard?" "Strahd is dead," Rowan said, resting her hand on Casimir. "Dead? What do you mean?" "I mean we killed him. He's not coming back." Metis's face lit up, and his thin lips curled. "My daughter killed Strahd von Zarevich?" "I had help." "Rowan, I always knew you were born to greatness, but to think that you defeated Strahd, and when you are so young." The others were still standing outside the crypt, holding their stances, watching in case this vampire should become violent. Metis paid them no attention, and said to Rowan slowly, I know I was a strict father to you. I was not the father you would have liked, but I was the father you needed. And look what you've accomplished. You've avenged your mother's death. It is proof that I raised you well. A flash from the Amber Temple came to Rowan's mind, and she shook her head. Even in her accomplishments, her father always took the credit. You never apologize, do you? Rowan said. She asked Navara for her cloak. The warlock gave her the garment, and Rowan draped it over Casimir. Then she lifted his body and carried it out of the crypt. What are you doing with him? Metis asked. You give your clothes to that dead man, while I am standing here with nothing? Casimir was our friend, Navara said. Her voice was sharp. Metis looked at her for the first time. A friend? He asked. You killed someone whom Rowan cared about deeply, she said. Metis eyed his daughter. So, you're into boys now? Rowan glared at him. Metis shook his head. I did not know he was special to you. I hadn't eaten in 20 years. He pointed to the nail-ridden coffin. Strahd kept me in this Iron Maiden for all that time, never giving me a drop to drink. Then he released me in here with this elf. I thought I recognized him as the brother of a woman I once knew, but he meant nothing to me. Metis started to move forward, but then shied away from Apollo's light. Tell this man to get that weapon out of my face. It burns. Close the door, Rowan told Elvir. Rowan, don't you dare leave me in here. I will not be held prisoner any longer. I am... Suddenly, Metis froze in place. Navara was staring him down, the talisman clenched in her fist. Elvir shut the door. Rowan laid Casimir on a section of the floor that was free of bat guano. She tried to remain calm when she asked, Is there nothing you can do, Henry? I'm sorry, Henry said. There's nothing any of us could have done. Wait, Navara said. There is someone. Rudolf van Richten. He's here in the dungeon. Everyone was shocked and relieved when they found the monster hunter. He was locked away in a prison cell filled with 3 feet of murky water. Esmeralda was beside herself with joy to find the long-lost legend. In an adjacent cell, they also found Erwin and Danica Martikov, along with their 2 sons. Strahd's agents had arrested them for their involvement with the Keepers of the Feather, and for the past 3 days they had been in the dungeons with little food and little drinkable water. Elvir carried the youngest boy, whose body was shaking with cold. Is it possible? Rowan asked Van Richten when they brought him to Casimir. She tried to keep her hopes at bay, but they rose anyway. Van Richten coughed, his wet clothes dripping on the floor. He squinted at Casimir's body through cracked spectacles. There is a way to bring back the dead, supposing he hasn't been dead for too long, he said, then sneezed and wiped his nose. But I don't have the materials. A spell like that needs a rare and precious gem. Rowan's hope sank again, and she rested a hand on Casimir's head. She never had the chance to tell him how much he meant to her. Rowan, Henry said, serious. I think it's almost midnight. No, Rowan thought, realization hitting her in the gut. Casimir would come back from the dead. Her father had made sure of it. If his body wasn't destroyed, and soon, Casimir would forever be a slave to Baron Metis. Rowan knew what needed to be done, but she did not have the strength to do it. I'll do it, Henry said, holding Apollo over Casimir's neck. Wait! Navara yelled. Would this work? She handed Van Richten a golden pendant set with a bright red ruby. Van Richten inspected the gem. Where did you find this? It was Strahd's arcane focus, Navara told him. Van Richten marveled at it, then placed the gem in Casimir's mouth. He prayed the celestial words of the gods, casting a spell which few mortals in the history of the world had ever learned. The gem disappeared. Casimir's eyes opened. The desk elf sat up and looked at Rowan. "Rowan, are you all right? You're crying." Rowan's whole body shook as her emotions broke like a dam that had been holding back flood waters. She grabbed Casimir by the collar of his shirt and kissed him. Navara and Elvir went to rescue Davian from the high tower. Then they left Ravenloft along with the rest of the Martikovs. It was well after midnight when they found a place to camp in the nearby woods. The others stayed in the castle, uneasy about leaving Metis unguarded. They thought taking watch by his tomb would be the best way to ensure Barovia did not acquire a new vampire overlord so soon after losing its first. Stefania was waiting at the edge of the wood to meet them, and when she saw her family, she ran to them, praising the Morning Lord. Navara bedded down in a pile of leaves, while Elvir made a fire. Right before drifting off to sleep, she overheard Stefania talking. "I knew Strahd must have been killed," the were-raven said. "I was here watching the castle. At midnight there was no March of the Dead. That's when I knew. All of those brave souls had finally gone to rest." Something cold touched Navara's cheek, and she slowly awoke. Her nose caught the scent of fresh pine. A hand stroked her hair, and she opened her eyes. The sun was just breaking, and Gostamir smiled down on her. "Good morning, Navara," he said tenderly, as a few more snowflakes fell on her face. Her head was nestled in the crook of his lap. Navara sat up. The Martikovs were sleeping around the cold campfire, and everything looked so crisp and clear. The mists were gone. Navara put a hand on Gostamir's face. "You're here," she said in awe. "You did it, Navara. I'm free." Navara embraced him and felt a peace in her heart that she thought she had lost forever. "Oh, and I almost forgot." Gostamir snapped his fingers, and Herkamoid appeared. "Herkamoid!" Navara cried, as the pseudo-dragon flew into her arms. "I never thought I'd see you again." "Sure you would," Gostamir said. "He bounced right into the Feywild as soon as he was killed. If you'd had the right materials, you could have summoned him back. You knew that." "I thought I would never see you again either." Navara took Gostamir's arms and folded them around herself. The Martikovs began waking, and Gostamir startled. "Are you trying to flit away?" Navara asked. "Who? What?" "You're not an illusion anymore," Navara said, poking him in the stomach. "You can't vanish on me." "Who said anything about vanishing?" His eyes danced about in a show of innocence. Navara laughed. "Come on, I want you to meet everyone." Rowan woke up in the castle to find Henry, Van Richten, Irina, and Esmeralda plotting to kill her father. They were standing in front of Metis's crypt. "No!" Rowan yelled at them. "We are not going to kill him." Everyone in the room looked at her like she had gone mad. Casimir woke up beside her and blinked his eyes. Rowan licked her lips. She was thirsty and agitated, two feelings that never seemed to go away. "Why would you want to wait?" Henry asked her. "This should be done now." "We need time to think about what to do with him," Rowan said. "What is there to think about?" Irina asked. "If he escapes, we'll have to relive this whole nightmare." "My father is not Strahd," Rowan said. "And there are other things to consider." Rowan thought of her dreams. She believed there was truth in them, but how much? If those dreams came from the dark powers, as Casimir's had, then they could not be entirely trusted. "I should not have to remind you, Rowan," Van Richten said sternly, "but Baron Metis was an accomplice of Strahd. He's a vampire who has killed many innocents. including my son. He's as guilty as the Count."
"He also turned on the Count," Rowan said. "He saw Strahd's injustice and fought against him. We don't know the whole story, but we need to make sure we are punishing him fairly."
Just then Nuvara arrived with Gostamir and Elvir.
"By the morning, Lord, who's this?"
Esmeralda said, looking Gostamir up and down. The Fae wore his usual shimmering raiment, and there was an ethereal glow to his whole appearance. Nuvara proudly introduced him. "I was surprised to see him this morning," Elvir said. "I suppose we'll be seeing a lot of strange things now that the curse is lifted. Good strange things, that is. Barovia's had lifetimes of bad strange for too long." "It's good to see you again, Gostamir," Henry said.
"You too, Alan."
Henry smiled and shook his head. Irina stepped forward.
"Guess who Esmeralda and I found in the torture chamber last night?"
"Myself." The others looked at her, puzzled.
"It was really Gertruda in disguise," Irina said. "Strahd must have planted her there in case you all came looking for me in the dungeons."
"Not to worry, though," Esmeralda said, patting the sword by her side. "We took care of her."
"What are we going to do with Metis?"
Nuvara asked, pointing to the vampire's closed crypt. The others eyed Rowan. Then Irina said,
"There's been some debate about that."
Everyone chimed in with an opinion, but by the end they agreed that Rowan should decide her father's fate. In the meantime, Gostamir sang a chant around Metis's tomb, assuring everyone that his song would keep the vampire locked inside. When no one was looking, Nuvara took Rowan aside, out of earshot from the others.
"You want him to live, don't you?"
the warlock asked her.
"I don't know," Rowan said. "If only my mother were here. She would have an answer. Maybe I'll never know if she really loved him, or if he was just as oppressive to her as Strahd was to Irina." "What if we could talk to her?" Nuvara asked.
Rowan's eyes widened.
"Talk to my mother? How?" "Come with me,"
Nuvara said, taking Rowan by the hand. Casimir, seeing Rowan leaving up the stairs, followed them. "Where are you two going?"
"Strahd's study," Nuvara said. "You can come if you want."
The study was still neat and orderly, filled with bookshelves lining the walls. Nuvara went to the books, running her finger along the spines.
"There you are," she said,
and took down a small blue book with silver letters stitched on the cover. It was one of Strahd's necromancy books, and it read, "Communicating across planes of existence." Nuvara sat the book on the square table in the middle of the room and flipped through the pages.
"I knew it,"
she said, stopping to read.
"There are spells in here to speak with the dead. This will take some time, but I think I should be able to contact your mother."
Rowan's heart leaped at the idea, and she began thinking of all the things she wanted to say. While Nuvara was hunched over the book, Rowan saw Casimir wander into Strahd's bedroom and cast a spell.
"What are you up to?"
Rowan asked him. "We need to clear out this castle of all its enchantments and secrets," Casimir said, waving his hand. "I wanted to start by looking for any magic items. This room is bound to have something." Casimir's wand pointed at a wall near the bed. "Aha!" he said, walking over to it. There was a hidden door. He opened it to reveal a small chest sitting on a dusty shelf. Casimir took out the chest and opened the lid. Inside there was a neatly folded red cloth. "This is magical silk," Casimir said. "Usually it's used to preserve things from decay. Very rare." Casimir picked up the cloth, and Rowan watched as he unwrapped it. A small blue flower fell into his hand. There was a slight gasp by the door, and Rowan turned to see Nuvara watching them. Tears welled in the warlock's eyes as she looked at the flower. Rowan was about to ask what was wrong, but Navara ran out of the room without a word. There were so many mysteries to uncover at Ravenloft. Rowan never did find out what was so special about the flower in the chest. She had her own theories, but never asked Navara. Days later, Navara said she was ready to talk to Sariel. The book she had found in Strahd's study warned that if this spell were not cast correctly, it could harm the caster. The first time Navara tried to cast it, she went mad for an entire day. She spoke nonsense, squeaked like a chipmunk, and had to be kept from chewing on shoes. Gostamir thought a mad Navara was wonderful fun, but Rowan was horrified to see her friend in such an addled state. The same thing happened the next day when she tried to cast it, and the day after that. Rowan told her to stop before she injured herself permanently, but Navara was determined. On the fourth day, Navara asked Rowan if she remembered where her mother had died. The spell stood a better chance of succeeding if cast near the place of her death. Rowan talked with Casimir, who knew exactly where the old tribesmen's settlement had been before it was destroyed. It took some time to find the place, and even then Rowan wasn't sure of the exact spot in the woods. "As long as we are close enough," Navara said, rolling up her sleeves. They were in a thick part of the Svalich woods, across the Luna River, on the far southwest corner of Barovia. "I'll do it this time. You'll see. Get ready. I don't know how long we'll have to talk if this works." Rowan crossed her fingers as Navara began casting the spell. Suddenly, the warlock's eyes went white. Rowan saw no ghost or spirit, but she heard a voice coming out of Navara's mouth. "Who calls me?" it said. Rowan recognized the voice at once, and her eyes began to tear up. Mother, it's me, Rowan. I miss you so much." "My Rowan, I know, and I love you," her mother said. Rowan held back from crying. There were so many questions, but time was passing, and she needed to focus on her father. "How long were you together with father? Was he cruel to you? Did he really oppose Strahd?" Every time in the past when Rowan had asked Sariel about her father, she had quickly changed the topic, telling her daughter never to ask again. But now Sariel spoke freely. "I'm sorry I never told you," her mother said. "I did what I thought best to protect you. Metis was a cruel vampire, but never to me. We were together for many years, and after you came, he did what he could to protect us from Strahd. Some would say vampires are incapable of love, but your father loved me." Rowan nodded, understanding her father's pain. Then she asked what she wanted to know most of all. "Did you love him?" "Yes." Navara told them the connection was slipping, but right before Sariel faded entirely, Navara asked a question of her own. "Sariel? Hello, I'm Navara, Rowan's friend. I want to know, does the pain of loving someone who's done so much evil ever get better?" "Yes," Sariel said. "No one is beyond the mercy of the Morning Lord." And then Sariel was gone. Van Richten was furious when Rowan decided not to execute her father. He reminded her that full vampires were incapable of goodness or acts of repentance. They were like demons. They had chosen their fate and could not choose again. Rowan listened, but she did not believe it. Instead, she went to Metis's crypt and gave her father an ultimatum. Either he would be given over to the judgment of the King of Beaumaris, or he would be imprisoned in a room in Castle Ravenloft. "A room?" Metis spat, after he put on the clothes Rowan had given him. "You would be living in Ravenloft with me," Rowan said. Casimir had convinced Rowan to stay in the castle and help him to renovate it. Henry had thought this was a grand idea, and proclaimed that since Rowan was the last von Zarevich, Ravenloft should be hers. "You want to hold me captive because I never let you go out," Metis said with contempt. "You mean to turn the tables on your own father."
"Would you rather I hand you over to the king? The lost county of Barovia has reappeared on the material plane, and you can bet the king won't be happy when he finds out there's a vampire on the loose. He would probably order Henry to execute you."
"You mean Sergei? I saw him with Apollo. How is that fool alive anyway?"
"That fool helped me defeat Strahd."
"I refuse to be confined to a single room. I want free reign of the whole castle." Rowan raised her eyebrows.
"That's out of the question."
Metis crossed his arms. "Then I'll stay here and die."
"Father, you're making this difficult. I'm trying to help you."
"Then you should respect my honor. It is undignified for a baron to be kept prisoner where he once sat in council as a peer of the county. Let me roam at least to the curtain walls."
"I can't let you do that."
"Then I shall die." Rowan sighed. He was the same selfish and stubborn man she remembered, but she had to think of what her mother had said.
"I talked to Sariel today."
Metis's red eyes fixed on Rowan, and he became very still.
"I asked Mother if there was hope for you. She told me, there is hope for love if one is willing to put another's life before their own. And she said you may yet see her again."
Metis was quiet. Then he asked, "Did you see her?"
"I spoke with her through a spell," Rowan said. "But I believe she really loved you. You have a terrible darkness in you, Father, and I don't know what's in store for your soul. But if you care anything for her, for yourself, then you must do what she said."
Rowan left her father to think, closing the crypt and having Gostamir lock it again. "Did I hear you right?" Gostamir asked her, after sealing the door with a song. "Are you really going to shut him up in a room?"
"Well, yes, if he cooperates," she said,
knowing that Gostamir had overheard the entire conversation.
"But isn't that what he did to you as a child? And now you're going to do that to him?"
Rowan looked at the Fae, incredulous.
"You're taking his side? You make it sound like I'm being unreasonable."
"If he's locked away, how will he ever see the light?"
"You think I should let him go free?"
"If you want someone to change, they need to see love at work. You and Casimir are going to live in the castle and have a family. What better example of love could there be? Your father could be a part of that family." Rowan opened her mouth to contradict him and tell him not to be so presumptuous about her and Casimir, but then she closed it again. "In fact," Gostamir said, "I think you know a certain wizard who might be able to cast a spell on the whole castle just for your father." Rowan went with Casimir to find the old victor. Casimir was amazed when Rowan explained how the wizard had time-traveled. But when she told Casimir her plan for Baron Metis, his face turned as pale as it had been when she found him in the crypt. Casimir spoke his mind, imploring her to reconsider Metis's punishment. But Rowan convinced him that they should ask the great Mordenkainen for help. Perhaps this was a problem they could solve with a bit of magic. The first time the old wizard had seen them alive after the battle, he had blinked, pinched himself, and mumbled, "Time paradoxes. Never trust a time paradox." But aside from that, he seemed unconcerned that his grandiose predictions of doom had come to nothing. Now they found him again in his magnificent mansion, which was camped just outside the gates of Ravenloft. "I have just the spell you're looking for," Victor said, when Rowan explained the situation. "May I see that?" He pointed to Casimir's wand. Casimir handed it to him, and Victor waved the focus, feeling it between his fingers. "What you'll need is an imprisonment spell. One where anyone can come and go from the castle as normal. Everyone except Baron Metis." Then he cast a spell over Ravenloft, and the castle shimmered for a moment. "There you are." Victor handed the wand to Rowan. "Now all you have to do is lock the spell however you wish." "Lock it?" Rowan asked. "Every imprisonment needs a lock and key. You can think of whatever you wish. A password, a specific day, a condition, anything." "A condition?" Rowan asked. "Yeah, like you could have the spell remain locked unless something you specify happens." Rowan pointed the wand at Ravenloft. "I know just the thing." The next month was filled with busy days and somewhat restful nights. Whenever Henry had a difficult time sleeping, he would summon Snowflake and groom the horse until his coat shone. During the days, Henry helped cleanse the land of monsters that remained, although most of the vilest creatures had vanished when Strahd was killed. Anastasia, however, was still at large, and Henry was convinced she had escaped on the night of the battle. He would have continued his search for her outside Barovia, but Navara asked him to stay until the winter solstice. "I'm getting married," Navara told him. "Gostamir and I want to have it at the Wood Fane on the first day of winter. We'd love it if you could officiate." Henry gladly agreed. On the morning of the wedding day, a fresh blanket of snow covered the valley, and the circle of standing stones by the windmill glistened white in the sunlight. People came from all over Barovia and beyond. Navara's parents and sister came, along with a middle-aged man named Eric.
"So," Eric said, upon meeting Henry, "you must be the other sheriff."
"Henry Gibson," Henry said, shaking his hand.
"Navara told me about you as soon as I got here. Said you were a fine lawman."
"She was a good deputy," Henry said.
"That she was. She's a good kid. I hope you haven't heard anything too bad about me. I was probably the worst hard-ass she's had to put up with."
Henry raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I wouldn't say that." Henry talked with Eric until the Martikovs and Temescu's came, bringing food and wine. Henry helped them set up their cart, and Erwin and Danica told him about reclaiming the Blue Water Inn. It had been taken over by 3 Vistani sisters after their tavern in the village of Barovia had burned down. Henry's stomach tightened at the mention of them, and he was thankful that they had been run out of town. However, Erwin and Danica's return to Vallaki had not been without heartache. Their youngest son, Bray, fell sick with a fever he had caught in the dungeon of Ravenloft, and died a few days later. Now their other son, Brom, was playing in the snow with his cousins. The children's light-hearted frivolity was a sharp contrast to the sad news. But there was still a haunted look that lingered in the dark circles of Brom's eyes. It would be a hard road ahead for the family, but at least now they were free. The Vinshaws, whom Henry could not stop thanking for restoring his armor, came in raven fashion, strutting about in their shiny black feathers. Muriel's snake peered out from under her wing, watching everyone. Baron Dmitri and his wife Anna Kreskova came with Milivoj and the 2 young children, telling stories of the terrible mongrel folk. After Strahd's vampire spawn had released them on the village of Kresik, the villagers had to drive them out by force.
"Those mongrels fled into the woods," Dmitri said, puffing on his pipe. "But not before they had done a great deal of damage to our livestock and food supplies."
Mordenkainen, Esmeralda, and Van Richten also arrived, though Van Richten turned a cold shoulder when he saw Rowan. The famous monster hunter could not forgive the druid for letting Baron Metis live. Victor, on the other hand, was proud of his imprisonment spell, and the lock Rowan had chosen for it. Apparently, the only one who could now break the spell was Metis himself. If the vampire could truly repent, not just in word or through trickery or lies, but if his very heart could be transformed, he would be set free. Henry chuckled at that. He respected Rowan for trying, but he had no delusions. If the only way to break out was a change of heart, then Metis would be imprisoned forever. More people arrived, and Henry was surprised to see Madame Eva with Arabelle. The little girl shed tears of joy when she saw Casimir. She ran and hugged him, and Casimir talked with them both for a long time. When all the Dusk Elves arrived, each of them wanted to meet Rowan. They bowed low in reverence, as though she were a goddess. And they were not the only ones. The druid Grugok came with a delegation of mountain folk, and knelt before Rowan, seeking her pardon for their collusion with Strahd. They swore allegiance to her as their tribe's rightful chief.
Kavan chose you, Grugok said to her. Please lead us, wielder of the spear.
Although modest in speech, confessing that she was young and inexperienced, Rowan accepted the honor of their gesture. She stood proud and confident, like a queen in the days of old. She welcomed the mountain folk as her own people, and declared that they should be considered Barovians, no less than the Dusk Elves or the townsfolk. Henry smiled, watching from a distance. Who could have guessed that this was Whiskers, the stray cat who used to beg at his door? When the sun faded behind the clouds and snow began to fall, music burst forth from the fane. Satyrs, centaurs, and nymphs appeared in the circle of standing stones, playing flutes, pipes, and drums. Pixies, sprites, naiads, and fairy dragons were dancing and singing. Together they marched out of the fane, forming two lines with an aisle between them. That was Henry's cue. He stood by one of the menhirs, while the fey creatures continued playing their music. Then a trumpet sounded by the windmill. Everyone turned to see Navara and Gostamir. Snow was falling on their beaming faces as they walked arm in arm down the aisle toward Henry. The Fey Prince wore a crown of ice and a white robe that trailed alongside Navara's gown. The bride's dress, composed of thinly layered fabrics, fluttered like large leaves as she walked. The blue shade of the gown matched the blue color that fringed her red hair. The music stopped when they stood in front of Henry. Navara and Gostamir exchanged their vows, promising to love each other until the end of time. When they kissed, the people cheered, and a crown of ice appeared on Navara's head. The creatures from the Feywild struck up their music again, and the newlyweds began to dance. Everyone else soon joined in. When Henry saw Irina, he bowed to her. "Care to dance, pretty lady?" She smiled and took his hand.
"I was thinking," she said as they danced. "Are we actually married? I mean, neither of us remembers what happened hundreds of years ago, and all we did was kiss and get covered in blood."
They had been living together as though they were married in a small house in Vallaki, but Henry had not stopped to think about the technicalities of it. "I don't know," he said. "We could have another wedding if you think—"
"No," she said, stopping him. "I don't need another day when the world focuses on me."
Henry nodded, careful not to step on her toes. "I know exactly what you mean. What do you say we live in Blackford, on the outskirts of town, where it's quiet and no one knows who we are?"
"I'd like that, Gibson. I'd like that a lot."
When the dance was over and the songs had ended, Navara bade her friends farewell.
"Where are you going?"
Arabelle asked, when Navara hugged her goodbye.
"To the Feywild," Navara said.
Gostamir was going to take her there. She felt bad asking him to live in a place where he had been trapped for so long, but he told her the only reason he had wanted to be free was to be with her.
Please come back again to see us, Arabelle said. I'll tell you more fortunes. I could read your palm now if you like.
Navara pulled her hand away.
No, thank you. I've had enough prophecies to last a lifetime.
Navara looked at the little girl, but did not have the heart to tell her she might never return. Barovia, though beautiful, especially now that the mists were gone, held too much pain for her to bear. Suddenly, out of the standing stones emerged a white unicorn. The majestic beast wore neither saddle nor bridle, yet Gostomir approached and mounted it. His cloak draped over the unicorn like a blanket of snow. When Navara climbed onto the animal's back, it carried them to the center of the fane. Navara looked beyond the menhirs, at the hills rolling down to the Ivlis River, unsure if she would ever be free from the charm of this ancient land.
You know, Gostomir,
Navara said, sitting behind him.
I think I know why the first day of winter is your favorite, even though it's the darkest day of the year.
Oh? Do tell.
Because every day afterward gets brighter.
Gostomir smiled. Then he snapped his fingers, and they disappeared. Epilogue. 1 year later.
Ravenloft cast a shadow on the road, despite the sky being grey and the sun being masked by clouds. Even in freedom, Barovia still showed signs of what it once was in the Shadowfell. I rode to the castle gate, and a frigid wind blew through my cloak. I shivered, and not just from the cold. How had I grown so accustomed to the outside world that coming back here after only a year should make my heart race? Stella Wachter, Ravenloft's new champion, met me in the courtyard. It calmed my apprehensions to see her instead of Rahaden. She showed me through the castle and brought me to a room with many books and a crackling fire. I relaxed a little more, letting the warmth soak into my chilled bones. When the Countess saw me, she stood up from a high-backed chair by the hearth. I gave a bow.
"It's good to see you again, Elvir," the Countess said as she greeted me. She wore a simple dress with a tall collar, and her white hair was partially braided, a style I had never seen on her in the past. It made her look older and more regal. "It's good to see you too, Countess." I kissed her hand.
"You can still call me Rowan. That is, until tomorrow. Then I expect you to address me by my full title, Countess Rowan von Zarevich of Barovia."
She gave me an imperious stare, then cracked a smile. I had come for her investiture, the ceremony wherein she would swear fealty to King Llewellyn and officially be created Countess.
"Come, sit,"
Rowan said, indicating a chair near her own. We sat and conversed in the study while we waited for the others to arrive. The room was just as I remembered, except that there was no portrait of Tatiana above the mantel. Rowan asked me how things were throughout Beaumaris, and I told her life was good for a simple, traveling bard.
"You're too modest," Rowan said. "Travelers from far and wide come to visit this valley, and I have a hunch it's all due to you. People are spellbound by your ballads."
I smiled at that.
"Blinsky's toy shop became a success almost overnight," she said. "Everyone coming through Barovia wants to buy a Strahd rag doll or a Bucephalus rocking horse. Blinsky even made dolls of me and some of the others. Not Irina. Before she left, she forbade him from making any doll of her ever again."
A servant brought us some refreshments, and I asked Rowan about Esmeralda. Rowan sipped her glass of wine.
"She's been a great help to me. She found a werewolf den in the northern foothills and helped clear out monsters from the Svalich woods. I thought she might want to leave Barovia after that, but now she's Valaki's new sheriff."
"Sheriff?" I asked. "What do people think of a Vistana being sheriff?"
She faces prejudice from the locals, but Esmeralda's not one to be bothered by people's opinions of her. Of course, Madame Eva and the rest of the Vistani packed up their wagons and left last winter. It was for the best. But I think you and I know the real reason Esmeralda stayed.
I did, and it wasn't just so she could help Valaki. Before I left Barovia, Esmeralda told me she was convinced that Strahd wasn't dead for good, and she wanted to be there to stop him when he returned.
"Hello,"
said a cheerful voice from the doorway. Rowan and I both stood up to greet Gostomir. He walked into the room with a bounce in his step and a baby cradled in his arms.
"Gostomir,"
Rowan said, giving him a welcoming hug.
"I didn't think you were coming."
"Pish-posh, of course I came. I wouldn't miss your big day." She looked at the infant.
"And this must be
Aravan," said the Fae proudly, rocking the baby.
"I let Gostomir name him,"
said another voice from the door. Rowan and I turned to see Navara. She was as lovely as I remembered, with bits of blue in her hair.
"I get to name our next child, though," she said.
Then she hugged Rowan and me.
"It's so good to see you both."
Not long after Navara and Gostomir came, Henry and Irina were shown in by Casimir, and the room became a buzz of greetings. I sat back down and talked with Henry, while Casimir, Rowan, Navara, and Irina went into the dining hall in the next room over. Henry asked about my father, and I told him he was doing what he had always done, raising grapes at the Wizard of Wines, content to be with his children and grandchildren. It had taken a while to rebuild their home, but they finished in the spring with the help of Grugak the Druid. "Apparently," I said, still struggling to believe it, "Grugak and my father have become fast friends now." Henry stood by the mantel, thumbing his short beard. The new style suited him, though it did make him look older. "How about you, Henry?" I asked. "How are things in Blackford?" "All right," he said. "Irina and I are just living day to day." Henry looked up at Gostomir, who had been standing by the study's table, cooing at the little infant. "What about you and Navara, Gostomir? How's married life?"
"Oh, wonderful," said the Fae. "Navara and I make love almost every day, sometimes twice a day."
"Wow, okay, I didn't mean—" Henry cleared his throat. He looked at the baby, whose tiny face could barely be seen under the swaddling clothes, and said, "I can see you've been very productive."
"You three,"
Navara said, coming back into the study.
"Rowan says dinner will be ready at any moment. Henry, you must see the dining room. It's completely different."
Gostomir gently bounced into the other room, but Henry didn't move. His hand was on the mantel, and he stared at the fire in the hearth as if he had not heard her.
"Henry?"
Navara asked, walking up to him.
"Are you coming?"
Henry blinked and looked up. "What was that?"
"We're going to the dining room," she said.
Henry brushed his hair with his fingers. "Right." Navara narrowed her eyes, seeing past Henry's placid facade.
"What's troubling you?"
Henry shrugged his shoulders. "Nothing. I was just talking with Gostomir. I'm glad you two are doing well."
"Oh, it's been hard,"
Navara said.
"Gostomir is wonderful, but—"
She looked around the study.
"You know, I told Rowan I wasn't going to come, but Gostomir thought I should be here for her, and I wanted to see you."
She nudged him with her elbow.
"How are you really?"
"Things haven't exactly been peachy," he said. "Irina and well, it's been hard for us too. I think Irina expected the outside world to be this heaven on earth, But the real world has its fair share of misery too.
Henry, I know you and Irina are trying to live a quiet life, but it might be good for both of you to travel a bit. Remember the adventures that brought you together. You can only find yourself when you get outside of yourself and start helping others. There's more than just Barovia that needs saving out there.
I watched these two from my chair, thinking how each seemed destined to live the other's dream. The warlock, who had always wanted to travel and fight monsters, could only find peace by settling down, while the knight, who had never wanted anything more than the life of a fisherman, remained discontented unless he accepted his role as the chosen one. We all sat down for dinner in the newly refurbished dining hall. The oaken table was completely new and polished to a mirror finish. There was no hundreds-of-years-old cake, but rather golden candelabras, each one holding 9 beeswax candles. Every corner of the room was cleansed of the filth that had been decaying there for so long. The walls were covered with tapestries of chivalric tournaments and bucolic hunting scenes. Navarra asked about the harp. Rowan said that it was gone, along with the rest of the junk. The warlock's expression showed a trace of sadness. There was a loud crash from a room above. Rowan looked at the ceiling and sighed.
"That would be father," she said. "Every now and then he goes into a fit and destroys whatever painting he was working on."
When she saw the looks on our faces, she added,
"Don't worry, he won't be joining us for dinner. He's shut himself away, obsessed with painting a perfect portrait of my mother."
We ate in silence for a while, before Henry tried to change the subject. He commented on the complete renovation of the dining room, and congratulated Rowan on her excellent taste in decor.
"I would have liked things to be simpler," Rowan said. "But it was father who insisted this room should be furnished as you see it."
Henry frowned.
"How have you been, Casimir?"
Irina asked. Casimir also seemed glad to change the subject, and told us of his recent engagement to Rowan. The news lifted our spirits, and we raised our glasses to their good health. Rowan told us they would marry in the spring, in Ravenloft's chapel. "As long as we can clear out all the bats," Casimir said. "The pesky things keep coming back to nest in the chapel's rafters." Rowan added that the small varmint's favorite place to return was the catacombs, which was coincidentally a place her father also liked to frequent. Irina steered the conversation out of the dungeons by asking about other people in Barovia. Rowan began by telling us about Stella Wachter, whom she had hired several months ago to serve as chamberlain of the castle. Stella had proven to be surprisingly resilient, and displayed a talent for management. Later it was discovered that her mother, Lady Fiona Wachter, had been leading a secret cult of demon worshippers in Vallaki. For this, and for her involvement with Strahd, she was arrested. But after a month of imprisonment, she was pardoned and banished. Rowan was indeed a more merciful leader than her predecessor. Navarra asked about Vasilka, and I was happy to tell her that she was now living in Waterdeep. The courtiers of Beaumaris were intrigued by such a grotesque yet beautiful creation. In the City of Splendors, the flesh golem had become a fashion model and learned to behave herself in high society. Navarra told us that she had visited Waterdeep herself, where she attended a funeral. Though she didn't say whose funeral it was, I knew it was Escher's. Rowan asked me if I had seen Van Richten. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I had. He remained bitter for not being able to exact revenge on the vampire who had murdered his son. He told me he felt that all his monster-hunting efforts had been in vain. As far as I know, he's spending his days writing books about his exploits. We also spoke of Victor. He had become the new burgomaster of Vallaki. In this role he was a much better man than his father. It took a while for his mother, Lady Petrovna, to adjust to her son being older than herself, but in the end she was proud of the man Victor had become. Rowan told us he turned down an invitation to take up his old position as headmaster at the Houses of Merlin. Instead, he wanted to rebuild his beleaguered hometown and start a new school near the windmill outside Vallaki. He would call it the Old Bone Grinder. Right before our meal was done, a servant with a face covered in cat fur and lizard scales approached the table. It was Siegfried, one of the mongrel folk Rowan had taken in.
"What are you staring at?"
she snapped when she noticed us watching.
"What do you need, Siegfried?"
Rowan asked. The servant stated in a matter-of-fact tone,
"There's a monster loose in the castle."
Upon hearing Siegfried's description of the monster in question, a black panther with 6 legs and fearsome tentacles on its back, Gostomir exclaimed that it was merely a displacer beast.
"His name is Moonshine," Gostomir said. "He's only a cub, and he's our gift to you, Rowan."
Casimir's mouth dropped open. After dinner, everyone was occupied in a mad chase trying to catch the beast. Everyone except Navara. After the warlock took the baby from Gostomir, carefully cradling the infant, she crept away without the others noticing, and went down to the catacombs. I followed, quiet as the dead, and Navara didn't observe the raven among the bats. She walked right up to Strahd's crypt. The gate was locked and sealed with magic, but she teleported beyond it to enter the tomb. She ran a hand across the solitary closed coffin, dust trailing on her fingers. I could see Navara's breath in the cold darkness as she cast a spell. Her eyes went white.
"Hello,"
she said.
"It's me, Navara. I've brought someone for you to meet."
The infant stirred in her arms, and I saw a shock of black hair beneath the swaddling clothes.
"This is Aravan von Zarevich, your son."
The end. Thank you for listening to this recording of The Ballad of Barovia by the Were-Raven Bard.